And I think that's exactly what's happening now. For those that have been designing conversational interfaces for a while, we're now a species with amnesia because the basics have been forgotten.
That concept of thinking through the journey and designing it has never gone away. And that absolutely needs to happen still.
Work back to the technology, work back to the process, work back through your policy.
So for me, that's a really interesting context-aware personalization.
Yeah. Although you're going to have a lot more to do on testing, but it should at least free you up to do more of this kind of stuff. If you can lower the effort of creation.
I think this is why we think that Elerian as a technology and us as a business coming together makes sense.
The following is a conversation with Martin Cross, who is the president at Connect, WeConnect.tech. It is a services provider that helps businesses digitally transform using artificial intelligence. Recently acquired Elerian AI. Now, for you hardcore Vux fans, you'll be aware of Elerian.ai because we did a webinar with them and Deepgram. I think it might have been a year or so ago, and it was all about how to get voice AI right. A big focus of the conversation is around context management, or context engineering as it has become known. In conversational AI, you are dealing with context at various different levels. You've got session context, you've got journey context, you've got user context. There's a whole bunch of data coming from lots of different places, CRM, your website, telephones, call transcripts. You've got the verbose utterances that customers are saying to your AI. All of this data is context, and you can use that context and leverage that context to create super ultra personalized experiences. It's something that hardly anybody is thinking about. Everyone's too concerned with just making RAG work or trying to get agentic AI to work. But the reality is that the next level experience design when it comes to AI is going to be all about context management and context engineering. So this is a big part of this conversation, which I think you're going to really enjoy. Without further ado, this is Martin Cross, president at Connect on VUX World.
Trends, madly follow trends and jump on the bandwagon for certain things. And the conversational AI is clearly one of those, and it's one of those on steroids. And we implement things without really thinking through what we're trying to achieve with them.
Yeah,
which is what I'm finding interesting about this particular marketplace. I see more often customers have already jumped in, and it's all gone wrong. And then you're coming in to kind of help them understand why it went wrong and explain a better process for coming up with an answer. It's almost, I have this analogy around cakes, which I think a lot of people find annoying, but people keep on obsessing about the ingredient, but they forget that an individual ingredient, but they forget that they actually need a set of ingredients. They need a recipe to put it together, and they need a chef who knows how to put it together.
Yeah.
So people go out and say, right, I need an ingredient, and that ingredient is conversational AI, but that's not the outcome they're looking for. There's stuff they need to deliver, the challenges they need to overcome, and they haven't thought through that process or how or whether that tool will deliver the outcome. And so you see quite often these weird things like conversational FAQs that provide horrific experience for the customer because no one thought about, all I'm doing is I'm just going to stick this technology on front of something I already have and not thought how it would work in the real world, how it needs to be different from how it was when it was just an FAQ on a website, and how the customer is going to interact with it.
Yeah, I think that it's very much a case of, it's not even like what you were suggesting there is like conversational AI is the answer. What's the question? It's even more specific than that, which is that specifically generative AI is the answer. Now, what's the question?
Yes, that's very true.
Which is interesting. Like, I think that example you gave there of the FAQs, it's a bugbear of mine. I don't know if you saw it. I posted something quite a while ago now, actually. I called it the full stop problem. And it's essentially that's exactly what it is. Is that when a company or a person or whoever just thinks that RAG is the solution And all they do is build a RAG chatbot based on the data that they have. I think the misconception is, well, we've got the data, therefore the answers are in there somewhere, therefore we have a chatbot,
Yes.
Whereas in reality, what ends up happening is that you end up with the full stop problem, which is every single FAQ responds with an answer and ends in a full stop. It lacks entirely the context around the customer journey. So what naturally follows this question? What journey is this customer in? Where are they in their sort of either purchasing or support sort of needs stages and stuff like that? And so you end up with stuff like the example I've used many times in the past is that if you ask a telco, how do I upgrade my contract? The response that you'll get from it is, to upgrade your contract, all you've got to do is pay off your contract, find a new phone, take out a new contract. And it's like, yeah, technically speaking, that is what I have to do. But you've completely misunderstood the underlying need in my statement, It was great. I saw an example the other week. I won't name the company, but it was an example where it's a retailer and I asked the question, do you have any deals on jackets? And the response that I got was something along the lines of, we often do deals on jackets, check the website for more information. If you found a price elsewhere that you think that we can match, then all you need to do is either send us a picture of it or send us the product code of it or send us the website where you found it from. We have deals coming in our newsletter regularly as well, so sign up to that. And if this isn't good enough for you, then you can always escalate. And those are the words that said you can always escalate. Not like you can always speak to a human. You should get an industry term. And underneath it had another little call out with a little link that said view article. So one response to one simple question gave me 5 potential next steps. It's just crazy.
Yeah, and talk to you in a very weird way, like the word escalate, which is like it's a technology-driven word as opposed to a real life. We're escalating to an agent or escalating a call. It isn't what people think about when they're calling a contact center. Yeah, I think so. I think this is why we think that Elerian as a technology and us as a business coming together makes sense. You can't deliver the technology on its own. You need to understand. You need somebody who can understand that experience and design that experience. You need data to almost drive the insight that you need as to what this is going to solve. And then you need the technology that works best in that environment. So there's at least 3 things you need to do, because I think there's no way you could have listened to all the conversations that are happening with customers already. But AI does allow you to effectively have that insight. So you can see, is your opinion, which may be wrong? Is it right? Is it nearly right? Is there something more fundamental there? You then need someone to design the process, the answer, make it feel natural. And then you need a tool set that can do it. And that's why I think the coming together of Elerian with some of their cool tech and Connect with that data-driven approach and the way to architect a conversation with a customer, a journey with a customer, fits really nicely. I think there's some other stuff, I guess, in that statement is that people think Gen AI is the answer. Now, what's the question, as you said? But actually, that conversational AI technology is probably a number of different technologies working together.
Yeah.
The first of which is transcribing what's being said into text, which is then analyzed, and intents and other things get surfaced, and then a decision is made as what to do next, and then that's delivered as text, which is then converted back to speech again, right? So there's a number of different technologies, and any one of those could go wrong and completely ruin the experience for a customer, or disable the brains that you think is sitting behind AI. I think we've spoken about that before, but the transcription is a vitally important part of that process. If you poorly transcribe what's being said, it doesn't matter how clever your AI is, understanding intents and entities and all the things that go on in there. If it's reading the wrong words and therefore doesn't know what you're really saying, and I think that's one of the challenges in this industry. People think it is a simple, straight black box. I'll put this into our environment, and it'll work. And there's so many things that can go wrong and do go wrong that just aren't considered before they're implemented. And that's why you need this magical chef to come together, tell you the ingredients you need and how to bake them into your perfect cake.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy, that. And so for those that don't know, I mean, for those who followed VUX for a long time, they've probably come across Elerian because we've done things with Elerian in the past, podcast, webinars, things like that. We did one with Elerian and DeepGram. I think it might have been last year, but it was a really great webinar. And so we learned a lot about Elerian there. Obviously, you guys acquired Elerian, what was that, like a couple of months ago now, something like that? Yeah. So it'd be interesting maybe to share a little bit about the thought process there. I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit just as we're getting started there. But like, what was the thought process behind Elerian? What interested you about Elerian compared to some other companies? Because, you know, there's thousands of them out there. So yeah, what interested you about Elerian, and what are the plans in terms of what you think you can use Elerian for?
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot of things behind that. So we obviously use various technologies in this space all the time to build conversational bots, agent assist, all those type of technologies. And so we see the challenges that sit there. And I guess one of the things that's been interesting me for a while, or interesting the business for a while, is training data. And a lot of people have been building these conversational AI, Gen AI tool sets from outside the contact center. It just so happens that contact center is a really good use case for this stuff. But because it's been built outside that, they haven't really understood the tools or the things that are available to improve that environment massively. And for us, voice recordings are a key ingredient that can be used as training data to massively improve the performance of these tool sets. And it's surprising, virtually nobody is taking that approach and using that training data to optimize that experience. Contact centers are weird, right? They have a very specific way of interacting, which is not the same as the tool sets that were developed on. You have specific language, you have a conversation more than just a simple answer to a straight question, etc. You also have all sorts of dialects, accents, terminology that is foreign to those AIs. And you also have some brilliant people, the agents, answering these questions in an elegant way, and you have the data proving that that was a good answer or a bad answer. So these voice recordings are incredibly useful as training data, training how best to answer a question, what a good answer looks like, what the next best action is. It's all there in the voice recordings, but also in there is how to understand a Glaswegian accent, or a strong Welsh accent, or whatever,
or a Teesside accent.
Exactly. We take it for granted, but the AI doesn't take it for granted. It wasn't trained this way. So that was the interest, right? Is we think there's training data there that can be used, and we see all these people coming to the marketplace not using that. Elerian walk into that marketplace with exactly that thought process. I can optimize this tool set based on your environment that is in your voice recordings. I can use that as training data. I can create a small language model that is specific to your business, your customers, your tools, your products you sell, your terminology, everything. And also, as you know, they're using 3 models at once and deciding which is the best, and so on and so forth. So the approach is a really practical, grounded approach in this marketplace, and the results are stunningly different. And because their approach is based on, there are several steps of technologies here. There's the transcription, there's a starting point, blah blah blah, and you move across those. We also felt we could dissect those technologies and use them to enhance other people's technologies. So you could use anybody's AI, but optimize it using some of those steps that Elerian have built for their own end-to-end platform. So we think it's a completely transformative approach, and it is in line with our viewpoint that there's training data in those voice recordings, and so many voice recordings, terabits of the stuff, far bigger data sets potentially in single customers, some of our single customers, that have been used to create these tool sets these standard tool sets in the first place. So we were very excited by that. We've seen it in action. We've seen it with customers and said, yeah, I think we can make a difference with this.
That sounds perfect. So am I right in understanding then that the way that you approach this, or the way that Elerian has traditionally approached this, is that you take the voice recordings from a customer, you then transcribe them, you analyze them, and you understand, based on the conversations that are actually happening between real customers and the business, the best way in which we can deliver that conversation using AI. So you're essentially fine-tuning. You mentioned small language models. Are you fine-tuning small language models based on the back and forth?
Right? So all of these things, all of the above, right? So if you've got a call center that's taking Geordie callers, you can create a small language model for Geordie callers or Geordie agents, for Geordie conversations, Glaswegian conversations, whichever they are. So you're creating models which are specific to you, but you also have good training data sitting there of what is the best answer to that question, or all sorts of, it is just training data, right? Because you've got question, answer, next best action, all there hidden in there. So it's a number of things, and it's also the terminology that is in there and understanding what that terminology means. If you're going to understand, as an AI is going to understand a conversation, it's got to understand the intent. It's got to understand what's being said. It's got to understand the entities in there, an address or a product that you own or you sell or buy. All of those have to be understood, and out-of-the-box AI won't necessarily understand that.
Yeah.
And you have to train it to understand that. Well, you can train it instantly with those voice recordings in all of those aspects, the dialects used, the terminology used, and you can also optimize that journey, because you can see this agent answers this way and gets a 90% closure rate. This agent answers this way and gets a 10% closure rate. Which one am I going to tell the AI to use? So for training purposes, voice recordings are magical, but very few people start there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can see how that approach, you could potentially, even fine-tune your speech recognition based on certain accents to, update the dictionary based on how something sounds, what it means, stuff like that, especially terminology. And that's always been use cases that, if you go back to the voice assistant days of Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant, when it was really popular to put voice on devices out of home and stuff like that, like acoustic modeling and, fine-tuning speech recognition systems was very much what you would do in order to make them perform. It almost feels to me as though that element of it has been lost in CX. It's like, we don't need to fine-tune speech recognition. We're using Whisper. It's got a 1.3% word error rate, we're fine with that. But then what happens when you squash that down to 8 kilohertz and you throw it through a phone channel and there's a dodgy signal and you break it up and stuff like that, and it's an accent. It's not necessarily as straightforward as I think.
You're talking my language again, which is the quality of, so obviously the telephone line has an entirely different quality, as you say, 8 kilohertz or whatever. But also, if your contact center is having customers calling in from the train, there's a background noise, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that it was never designed to cope with. And they're all being combined. Like you say, I've got an accent on top of a compressed voice. And I've also got vernacular I don't understand. All of that stuff makes it very difficult for those tools to work straight out of the box. And then it doesn't, again, as I said, if you can't transcribe that accurately, then you're in trouble when it comes to mining it for intents and so on, and making decisions with it.
Yeah. I suppose, what do you say? I mean, I think we've covered a lot of it, but I think that the general consensus, and the last time we spoke, we were talking about how, I suppose we're both not necessarily happy with the way in which, the AI solutions that are in play today are unfolding, because there's a lot of poor experiences. It's very similar to in 2018 when the first wave, in 2016 when the first wave of chatbots came about, and everyone said they were a load of rubbish, and they just didn't understand anything. And I'm sorry, I didn't understand that type of thing was the most common response to most chatbot interactions. But it's almost like we're almost getting there again, with generative AI, because people are just throwing PDFs at models and expecting them to just design the whole interaction for you, which then leads to subpar experiences. But I think the general consensus and the general sort of like culture that's emerging out of generative AI is just that. The speech recognition models are good enough. As long as you've got the data, the models will take care of it. And so we don't need to worry. We just need to plumb all this data into these models, use 11 labs for our voices and use Whisper for our transcription or whatever, and we're good to go. So, and many businesses listening to this will probably assume that that's what all you need to do. So what's your kind of advice for those businesses who are thinking along those lines? I think we've kind of covered in terms of like the speech recognition stuff, what can go wrong. I think we've probably justified that there. What about the, I've got data, all I need to do is point a large language model at my data and I'm good to go?
Yeah, but this is why you need a designer, right? And I guess this is you were talking earlier about what we were doing in 18, 17, when these things came out. What we were doing to cope with the inaccuracy of those models is we were effectively controlling and designing that interaction so that you were limiting the options, etc., that it was hearing or expecting to hear, and therefore giving it a better chance of understanding it. That concept of thinking through the journey and designing it has never gone away. And that absolutely needs to happen still. Going back to the FAQ thing, you can see AI being asked a question, it finds the nearest thing that is a fit. It may be completely bonkers for a real person, but it's going to give that answer because it's the nearest fit. It has no real world environment. So you have to think, you have to think through what that interaction looks like and feels like, and whether that stuff in your FAQ, which works in an online world where you as the customer is making the decision, is that article or that element relevant to me? Who's going to do that? The bot has to do that. Can the bot do that? Is that data structured right for that type of interaction, that new type of interaction, which is now conversation, not searching on a website? But then also secondly, is this assumption that the process is the same, whether the process is not optimized for AI. If you're just replicating an old, difficult process with AI, you're going to get a slightly flashier, unoptimized, difficult process, which sounds a bit cool, but actually isn't really improving it. So you've got to think through what is the optimized way of running this process. So, and again, I go back to the reasons why Elerian and Connect came together, is that's the bit that we add. Elerian, we're finding, if you're just replicating what somebody's done before with a different technology, you get a very similar performance or outcome. What you want to do is imagine what this could look like, exploiting this technology to its fullest. So you need this mix of the technology itself, the training data, and somebody who knows how to put that together. I'm back to my chef thing again, sorry. Who knows how to optimize that. And that's so what they should. So I think what customers should be doing is thinking in that way. And I'm a big fan of data-driven decision making. Right? Just is FAQs your problem in the first place? Is that really what's driving? How do you know that's driving the problem that you're trying to solve? Again, there's voice recordings, chat history, email history. There's a load of data sitting in contact centers, which historically was really difficult to interpret. It's really unstructured data. Gen AI is brilliant at interpreting unstructured data and surfacing insights. So rather than jumping straight to the answer is conversational AI, driven by Gen AI, why don't you look at that data and surface, this is the real underlying problem, I can solve it this way. So I would always want to take a step back, and there's lots of CIOs and CTOs and CEOs who say, I've got to have Gen AI, I've got to use it in my business because it's cool. But I think you want to use it where it's going to add value, and secondly, you don't want to use it where it's going to cause damage. And a lot of implementations have actually made the customer experience worse.
Yeah.
So I would take a step back. Don't look at buying an ingredient. Look for your chef. Decide what cake you need. Your data might tell you which type of cake you're looking for. Start small. with a use case, do a proof of concept, and then expand it out. And just keep looking at that data, seeing where it's working, and have an iterative process, slowly taking the pain and the weight off of your agents, your advisors, but also improving that experience for your customers. You don't have to go all in, turn all your agents off, point everyone to an AI where if you're lucky you can escalate, and they might not even allow you to do that. And your definition of containment is, well, they've given up. But that's a positive thing because my measure was containment, not whether the customer was satisfied in the first place.
Or got any result at all.
Exactly. And I think that is all too common. It's strange because these measures, we were using the similar measures and having the same problems back in the 90s, early 2000s with IVR, with containment and all that kind of stuff. We learned how to fix all of those things. And then AI comes along and we repeat the same mistakes all over again. And there's people who've been in this industry ages just screaming, saying, come on, listen.
Yeah.
It's the same stuff we've learned already. Just apply the same methodologies and you're going to get much better outcomes.
It's exactly the same as I mentioned. You go back to chatbots in 2016, voice assistants from then on, all of the lessons. In fact, there was a lot of lessons learned from early speech recognition systems, like everyone that was working at your likes of Nuance and stuff like that, working on voice recognition-based IVR systems in the 90s and early 2000s and stuff like that. There was a lot of lessons learned there in terms of what was known then as VUI design, voice user interface design, and all of that stuff was distilled into a number of kind of like books and publications and stuff like that, and that became like the foundation for everyone that was getting into Amazon Alexa and building skills and Google Actions and all that kind of stuff. And then voice interfaces became prevalent. And all of that learning from the early 2000s onwards and even the 90s was all built upon in the days of Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. And then generative AI kind of comes along. And from presumably your perspective, certainly from our perspective, it was being like, great. Now we can build on top of everything that we've been learning and we can make it even better. But at the same time, there's a group of people who've only just discovered Gen AI for the first time. And instead of learning the lessons and all of the heartache, the amount of Alexa skills that I built that were absolutely terrible, and the amount of chatbots that you build that are rubbish. And you go through the pain of learning what it is and how to craft dialogue and how to design a service and how to train a model and all that kind of stuff. And it just feels as though it's all kind of being lost and we're all starting from the beginning game, which is like, let's just grab some data, throw a model at it and hey presto, it's a weird. Graham Hancock, I don't know if you saw this series on Netflix called, what's it called? Ancient Apocalypse.
Yes, yeah.
It's a brilliant series. And I think he mentioned it in there a few times that we are a species with amnesia. And I think that's exactly what's happening now for those that have been designing conversational interfaces for a while. We're now a species with amnesia because the basics have been forgotten. Start with the conversation, work back to the technology, work back to the process, work back through your policy. Instead, it's like grab the policy data, throw a model at it, and let's see where we go. But
you're right. I think it appears to be human nature. And I think maybe it's also that we make it sound hard, right? Which is we're saying there's a skill here that you need. You need to think through these processes. And then some 19-year-old out of university says, oh, wait a minute, I can just point Gen AI at your FAQ and it's that simple. And for some reason, you want to believe the 19-year-old out of university is right and not the guy who's done this for 40 years or whatever. And I think it is human nature. But the good thing is it comes back, right? Because these things do go wrong, and then they're looking at, well, how do I fix that stuff? And the trick is obviously being able to demonstrate it. And I think I'm guessing people just do this with a demonstration, where they don't actually do it as a proof of concept. I think you need to do it in a real world environment to see if these things really work. Because I can create a demo, I'm sure any of those Alexa skill sets you created, if you did it as a demo with a very constrained question and answer, you get a very good answer. But in reality, people do all sorts of weird stuff when they speak. And you can't anticipate that without trying it in the real world. Actually, you said something quite interesting earlier about context, and I think context is vital to this whole story. Being context aware, personalizing that experience based on that context is the key to many of these things. If you understand that context, it also constrains what you need to understand, because you understand it's going to be in this narrow context, not in this wider context. I think that's very valuable. And I find myself, when I speak to these poor bots, try to create too much context, and then I confuse the art out of them. So I'll tell the whole story of why I got here to answer that final piece of the question, and that input is just too big and too complicated for it.
Yeah.
It's finding all the wrong intents in the wrong places, and then you're just getting more and more frustrated with the whole experience. And then you do have to attempt to escalate, or I'm writing in, "You are the worst bot I have ever worked with," but I'm sure that no one actually reads those transcripts to know that that's what's actually happening.
Yeah, it's the context one's a really interesting one. There's that kind of concept emerging now of context engineering, which again, if you were building bots in 2016, you've always had to work with context. Most of the time, it's like session level context. This person has said that their postcode is this, and so we need to keep that in the context of the conversation. And now they've said that their street number is that. We need to keep that in the context of the conversation. So you've got like very intricate session level context. You've then got, I suppose, intent level context, which is like, I'm just moving house and I'm moving into a new house, and therefore the context of this interaction is framed within the intent of moving house. But then you've also, I think, got like journey level context, which is, if I ask a question about contract upgrades, I'm not actually asking you to answer my question and tell me just pay off your contract and get a new one. The context of that journey is that I'm in the process of considering renewing my contract. And so we need to do something about that. So, for content designers and conversation designers, context has always been a very big part of everything that you do. But I feel as though now perhaps we're entering into a new phase of, if you want to call it kind of like context engineering or whatever, which perhaps needs to take those different levels of context into a conversation, and now using new tools and different tools begin to then, I suppose, either personalize or tailor those conversations based on those different levels of context,
Yeah, when I was speaking, I was thinking of this wider context, which is the new context, I guess, in my view, which is using that wider data set across multiple systems to understand what that journey context, as you said, is. As soon as you identify me when I call into the contact center, and as a mobile phone provider or whatever, you can look at when that contract expires. If it expires in 3 days' time, that context should inform your journey somewhat. And then when you say, how do I upgrade my contract or whatever, you're thinking, okay, it's in the context of that wider journey, or that I've sent an email to you proposing an offer of some kind if I do X, Y, or Z. There's so much data. Again, data's everywhere, and AI only works well and feeds off data. And the larger that data set and the wider that data set, the more powerful it can become. But also the simpler the interaction is to plan, because you know that context. I think if I call in as a customer to an airline, and you identify me and you can see that I was booked on a flight on the booking system, and you can see that I didn't board the flight on the boarding system, there's a bloody good chance I'm calling because I've missed my flight.
Yeah.
That context wasn't available before. I'd have to tell you that. But now you can anticipate that. And in fact, that's the first thing you can say. You can say, "Hello, Martin, I see you've missed your flight."
Yeah.
And you can almost drive the conversation in the direction in which you want to drive it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the real power. It's going back to data. There's the historic data in the voice recordings, training data, and so on. But there's also that interaction data, CRM data, marketing data, booking data, shipping data. There's tons of stuff that you can inform that context with, and deliver completely personalized, engaging experience.
Yeah.
as opposed to a very transactional one, which is, I'm guessing you're asking this question. The FAQ only gives you one answer to give. You don't like it, lump it, which is what happens all too often.
It's a symptom, I think, of the disconnected nature of chatbots in general, which is that they just sit on websites completely disconnected to any business system or even the website. Great context for a chatbot to understand is, what web page are you on right now? What 3 web pages did you visit beforehand? What have you been searching for on the website? Take all of that and you can really inform what you might be up to when you engage the chatbot. Every single chatbot, you go on to 20 websites now, and every single chatbot will greet you with, "Hi, how can I help?" None of them will ever say, "Hey, Kane, I've just seen you been looking at this product. Is there anything I can do to help in terms of you've got any questions about it or whatever?" Something at least more contextual. Same thing with some companies do this actually fairly effectively, but very few do, which is when you call, as you mentioned, you've got the context of the previous kind of interaction or previous kind of journey history in that airline example. Your flight's being cancelled or you haven't boarded your flight or whatever. You could use that context to inform the conversation. But also, what if I've been logged into the mobile app, I've had a conversation with the chatbot, I then call 3 days later, or maybe I speak to an agent, I call back again. If I'm calling about the fact that I haven't been connected on my internet yet and I've just recently moved house, and then 3 days later I call back, do you think it's because I'm still not connected?
100%. And this is the context. I think there's 2 things you mentioned there. I think that context of I've emailed, I've chatted, and now I'm calling. That is a true escalation that is happening. I'm getting more and more frustrated, and I'm trying to move to a channel where I'll get some kind of traction with it. And I think, there's 2 things to this. This goes back to a common problem with contact centers. I think we talk about Net Promoter Score. We measure Net Promoter Score as a transaction at the end of it. But when I hang up or stop typing, is the thing done that I asked for? The trouble is, often a contact center gives a promise. It doesn't actually do the thing. That goes off somewhere else in that process, which is why you're calling in again and again. AI can automate that back-end process, right? If I promise to do something, why isn't it going off and making those changes on the database to my address or turning my internet on or changing the speed? So again, this is the whole beauty of AI, is that there's other bits of that journey that it can help drive. That's true Net Promoter Score, that's true first contact resolution. If it then goes off and does those other things, and that probably is the proper definition of agentic AI.
It doesn't have to be, though. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just you could accomplish with traditional rule-based automations, some API calls.
I mean, it's a smile because we recently delivered won some business with a customer with 5 use cases because the CTO wanted to deliver AI in his business. We delivered those 5 use cases. We competed with some of the biggest and best companies in the industry. Some of these guys think they invented AI, people like Google, etc. Don't tell the customer this, but 2 of the use cases didn't use AI at all.
Yeah.
Because it didn't need to,
yeah.
right? Again, many of these things, AI isn't the answer to every question. At the moment, people are saying AI is the answer now. What's the question? It's understanding that journey, that workflow process, and then finding the right tool set or approach to deliver it. So yes, I think that context aware is really big in terms of seeing that interaction history. But also, like you said, if I've been on the website trying to book a holiday to Florida, and I call in 15 minutes later, there's a strong likelihood I'm talking about holidays to Florida. And again, I can understand that context and adapt it differently. But I also think there's this other problem, which is if you do what you're saying, which is understand what the customer was doing on the website, don't offer the bot until you think you need to. I think often we offer the bot. Every website I go to at the moment, the chat bot comes up and says, "Can I help you?" I haven't even typed anything in yet. I haven't even looked at anything. Why are you asking me that question? I don't need any help right now. And you're busy swatting the thing away. But perhaps you want to do it the other way around, which is watch sounds a bit creepy. see what the customer is trying to do. If they're hovering over an area having trouble, then pop up saying, I see you're having trouble here. Then there's real value at that point to the customer. So again, that's all about design. AI doesn't design that natively. That's where you need a designer to come in and say, this is the experience that you really need to get that output, whether that output is a net promoter score or whatever it is that you're trying to look for. But yeah, I think that technology is there. There are companies out there that will do that proactive diagnosis of, you need a chatbot now. And it doesn't need to be a chatbot. It could be an agent you push there, right? You're just having difficulty doing something. Push a chat at that point, and then provide that context either to the AI or an agent, and then support that transaction with that personalized approach. It's going to work miles better than just keep on popping up every time we go onto a new page. Another pop-up comes. How can I help? How can I help?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you mentioned something earlier on as well, which is really useful, which was when we were talking about context engineering. You were saying that, why not have a look in the CRM, gather that data, and then try and make an informed decision about what the user needs. And therefore, I can't remember the phrase that you used, but it was something like you're basically starting the conversation from a level playing field where you both understand each other. And that's basically the challenge of conversational AI. Fundamentally, it is about understanding. And if you can understand what the customer wants, then you're laughing. It's when you don't understand that there's an issue. And I think it might be James Jangola who in the Designing Voice User Interfaces book defines conversation as a shared quest for understanding. And that's basically kind of what it is. But the way I always think about it is that in the beginning of a conversation, it's the interaction with the AI is always user-led, which means that the user is telling the bot what it is that they think they need. Because every single bot will start with, hi, how can I help? So it's up to the user to try and explain in their own language what it is that they want. And they might not know what they want. They might just describe a situation like, I've lost my bank card or something like that. It's then up to the AI to translate that customer utterance to a point of understanding where it then knows the best thing for that customer in that moment. And it might not just be based on what you've just said. It might need to do a little bit of digging and a bit of back and forth to understand it. But once it's understood, you then need to turn that from a user-led conversation to an assistant-led conversation. And you need to then take over and be like, okay, right, it sounds like you've lost your credit card. Right, here we go. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to freeze your credit card now. Do you want me to freeze your credit card? Yes, bang. Okay, it's frozen. I'm going to send you a new one. Do you want me to send you a new one? Yes, bang. Then I've done. And that's how you end up kind of doing it. Whereas I think with a mistake that many of these Gen AI bots take or make is that they just think that everything should be user-led. This is part of the full stop problem. Everything should be user-led. You ask the question, I'll answer it, and I'll leave you hanging in a full stop. So you then have to think about what to say to me next. Whereas really the job of the AI should be, I should be working as hard as I can to really figure out what it is that you mean. And when I know what you mean, I'll take over the conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's spot on. That's really, you put that very elegantly. I'm going to steal some of that. I use it, but again, I think this also comes about KPIs, right? Is you want sometimes first contact resolution is I think the bot needs to answer the question first time, every time. And that's not how we work. And again, I'm going to hark back to training data. If you listen to the conversations or analyze the conversations in your voice recordings, chat histories, etc., that's not how interactions work with humans. As you say, there's this phase at the start where the agent is understanding the problem. And sometimes, if you listen to these conversations, it's frightening how difficult it is for the user to explain the problem to them in a way that they can understand. It's not surprising then that the AI has the same problem. If we have the problem, we've been trained quite well over 50-something years to understand what people are saying, and you still can't quite get the right information out. But then, as you say, it flips over. Well, now I understand your problem. I'm your guide. I'm your mentor. I'm going to take you through this journey and fix it for you. I'm going to do something entirely different. And again, this goes back to what is the definition of agentic AI? Agentic AI is an AI that can run that end-to-end process, right, without humans doing it. That means it has to be able to flip in these different phases. People seem to use agentic AI interchangeably with a chatbot or conversational AI, which it strictly is not, because I can speech enable a FAQ, but the FAQ was never a cognizant, an independent agent that could do things for me. It's just answers. And again, you have to design that process. And again, the process you might have followed as a person to guide that customer isn't necessarily the most efficient way to do it if you're AI. Just the multimodal approach that AI can take, flipping from voice to then texting you an answer, sending you a PDF, asking you to sign something and doing that, all it can take a journey that might have taken days and deliver that whole journey in minutes if you think through that process. Because once you've said, right, I understand your problem, you've got to do an insurance policy renewal, you need this data, I can get that data and I can run that whole process end to end and be compliant with all the things that need to be compliant. And again, that's the real value. That's life-changing stuff for that business, is if you can, and the customer, if I can take a process that takes days or weeks to minutes, that's when your net promoter score kind of come up. That's when your retention goes up. Customer advocacy goes up. Well, I guess I'm not really answering the question as to how you convince customers to do that. I'm just saying that I guess that's the challenge we all face in this industry.
Yeah, 100%.
Is being able to communicate this with customers at an early enough stage that they realise this is the opportunity and the return.
Yeah, and I think that the whole idea of automating the process. I mean, it depends how you define agentic AI, but there's a lot you can accomplish with just simple rule-based automation that doesn't require any degree of agency, apart from the fact that it's just going to keep running this automation every time you activate it. But like a great example of that is that we recently couldn't go on holiday because our kid had chickenpox, couldn't fly, so then we went and claimed on the insurance. And today, literally this morning, we found out finally, after weeks and weeks and weeks, that the claim's been settled and they're going to pay us or whatever it might be. Now, that process with insurance, it's a very difficult business because you're at the mercy of pricing often. And no one's loyal necessarily to the insurance provider. It's kind of, it doesn't matter who insures your home and who insures your car, or whatever. It's like just every year, just get a different one or whatever the price is. But I could say that if it was feasible for me to just go onto an insurance company's website, not even talk to a chatbot. If there's a chatbot involved, then fair enough. But even if not, just make a claim. Provide the evidence, which means that they have to tell me what evidence is needed, not wait 3 days for me to receive an email, and then give you that evidence. It's entirely feasible for AI to review that evidence, review the claim, make a comparison just to see whether or not what's provided in the evidence matches what's said in the claim, and is the evidence legit, and just approve it. Maybe it sends it to a human, and the human says, okay, yeah, I agree with what your decision is, let's go. But that could have been done in half an hour rather than like 5 to 6 weeks, which is how long it took. And if that was the case and we got an approval in half an hour, I do honestly think that that's probably enough for me to consistently insure my travel with that provider from now on. And I don't even know the name of the provider, but I bet you if they turn around my claim in half an hour, I would do.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's a couple of things there which I think is interesting. So you don't have to do that with all the claims, right? You could just use the AI to do the straightforward ones. I, as a consumer, will accept that this is a straightforward claim. I can do it in 5 minutes in the way you say, and I'd be delighted. But there's a complication here. It is going to take a bit longer, right? But if you do 90%, 80% of the transactional stuff in that way, that still has the same benefit. And I understand when something complicated needs an extra step or two, or needs a human in the loop. And I guess I slightly disagree with you about loyalty to insurance companies, in that you just see the quote and then you change. I think that's how you start. And then when you've had to make a claim, and you've had to wait 4 hours into a call center and they say, we can't handle your call here, or whatever it is that just destroys customer experience, they go off your list.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
If you then get a cheaper one from that company, you're not going to go back to that company. So you slowly, over time, you slowly reduce the list of people that you want to do business with based on the customer experience when you need to quote it. I think the challenge, as you say, for insurers is if you never have a claim to make against your car insurance, you don't know how poor that experience is. And then suddenly, so they get, I guess insurers might get confused as to thinking loyalty is actually, it's not loyalty, it's inactivity.
Yeah.
So they haven't used it, so they've got not to change it. But as soon as you have that activity, that's the moment of truth that makes the difference between you staying at renewal and going somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's difficult, I think, to understand that moment of truth is the moment of truth.
Yeah.
A lot of the time you're thinking it was your price. I don't agree with that. I think price is there for a certain point in your relationship with them, but the real moment of truth is when I have to make a claim and what that's like, and the pain I have to go through, and the time it takes, because I'm out of pocket for a very long period of time.
Yeah,
that has a big effect on you.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's true. And I think it's Stacia who recently went live with a chatbot from Boost, and I think one of the things that they say I think it's for like elderly people, typically travel insurance. One of the things that they say quite upfront, which when I saw it, I thought that makes perfect sense. That, and I don't know why all insurance companies don't do the same, which is that their sort of like leading positioning statement is, we pay 96% of claims within 24 hours or something like that. And it's like in lieu of having any evidence of what it will be like to go through that process. Stuff like that, like some social proof and all that kind of stuff, I think can be quite powerful. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting example, Stacia, because like I said, it is quite a specific demographic.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I think the vernacular and language used by an older demographic is again very different from the younger generation, on which a number of these AI tool sets were trained on, right? They were trained on Reddit and X and stuff. Again, I think they have trouble understanding some of the terminology used. So it's interesting that Stacia have managed to solve that issue with Boost. It'll be interesting how Boost have cracked some of those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, there's some good use cases I've seen examples of where it's handled things pretty well, to be fair. But I don't know how much effort has gone into, I don't know, content and language and stuff like that. We had a conversation with NLX and InWorld recently, which kind of reminded me a lot. I feel as though lately I'm just talking a lot about like how the lessons of 2017 and 2018 are resurfacing again, because we had a conversation about how what was learnt during the days of Alexa was that the older generation, if you like, this is very much a big generalization, but Heidi Culbertson, who used to run Ask Marv, I think it was, or Ask Marvy, which was an Alexa skill for people that lived in like care homes and stuff like that, so like older people. And what was learnt there is that that whole demographic on average benefited far more by having the voice slowed right down. So to you and me, you might listen to this voice talking back to you and think, oh, come on, get on with it. Like I'm listening to a podcast at like 2x speed, like, come on, get on. But yeah, in this case, it's like they really benefit from having the whole thing slowed right down. So I think like in that conversation, we were talking very much about personalization in voice AI, but I think it can be extended to conversational AI in general, which I suppose goes back to a little bit of that context question. If you can infer through the context, someone's birth date is X, therefore maybe we slow the voice down a bit.
I've just stolen. That's a great idea. That is, that idea that's very basic context, right? So you call in, you do your voice, you do your ID&V, and you see that my birthday was prior to the 1970s or whatever. I'm an old man, and therefore I'm going to slow down the conversation.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting. For me, that's a really interesting context-aware personalization.
Yeah.
But if the data's there, then I think that the beauty, I think, is that with the technology is you can trial that, right? You can take 2% of the calls and put 1% slowing down, 1% not. So you're not really impacting a lot of your customer base, and you can do that A/B testing and say, look at the magical effect. You can also, there's all sorts of interesting data about how people buy from other people, or even, and I guess you could do that buying from AI. if you mimic their accent, right? So
Yeah.
if they're calling from Wales, you're going to change. You can change your context and say, well, okay, I'm speaking with a Welsh accent today, or a Geordie accent, and it would be very. And you can do those tests, right? You can do those A/B tests if the data's there, right? And that's the magic. If you can get that context, get the access to the data, you can adapt this way. You can test it very easily, see the results, and then just iteratively improve this stuff time and time again. I think we're obviously talking about some very clever stuff, but there are basic stuff that you can use that method for in a safe, low-cost way, which you couldn't do before. So there definitely are real advantages to Gen AI or AI in general compared to what we were doing 7, 8 years ago, which you just simply couldn't do cost effectively.
Yeah.
So while it's the same rules you're using, the same experience, you've got a much more flexibility and lower cost way of getting there.
Yeah, and I think what's really good is that if you look at kind of like in 2017, how many companies that had chatbots were even thinking about multivariate testing? No one, because they're too busy tuning the models, if they even do tune the models. They're too busy, trying to perfect the NLU. They're too busy writing dialogue. They're too busy making handlers for fallbacks and stuff like that. They're too busy doing the actual thing just to get the application stood up. Whereas I think what's great about generative AI is that because it handles a lot of the dialogue management and some of the intricacies and complexities around the design of the thing, it should then, although you're going to have a lot more to do on testing, but it should at least free you up to do more of this kind of stuff. If you can lower the effort of creation, you can then focus on these things that we're saying here, more personalization, more multivariate testing, figure out the best ways to really make the experiences as great as it can be. I think the technology is good enough now to do everything that we've been talking about in this conversation and create brilliant, like top draw experiences that are like something from an act of magic almost. It's just that a lot of businesses are spending all their time just trying to get something stood up, so they can't get to that point.
Yeah, and I think that's true. But again, I'm going to go back to my cake thing, which is they're taking a lot of time to get it stood up because they're learning on the fly. They're learning you need the chef, right? You need the people who have done this before, have got the scars, understand this route is a dead end. Don't go down this route. This is the best way to do it. And then you can get all of the benefits, right? So you're not taking time to stand it up. You can stand it up in days. And then you can then really tune it to get the perfect outcome. And of course, you need to then understand what the outcome is you're trying to achieve. I still think there's a lot of outcomes missing from the design of this. What is the challenge you're trying to do? What if you're a contact center that needs to close contracts, as a sales contact center, what makes a good sale? That your output that you're trying to achieve with the bot is more sales. It's not just put a bot in front of an existing process, because if your existing process has a 20% success rate, your bot-enabled one is likely to have 20% success rate as well. So understand what the variables are. It's probably in your data. And then you can do that A/B testing, as you say, and see the two approaches. Oh, this one's doing 40%. Okay, let's go there. Month's time, more data, do more A/B testing. This one does 60%, and so on and so forth. And you're incrementally improving that output. Time and time again. So you never need a new bot, because you've got a new bot every month as you use the data in the testing to then tune it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, Martin, thank you so much for the conversation, my friend. That was absolutely fantastic. Really, really, really good conversation. I really enjoyed it. Where can people find out more? WeConnect.tech is the website, is that right?
That's the website. Yeah, it's all on there. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. Come through. Always happy to chat on LinkedIn.
Nice. We'll put your LinkedIn on the website, and also we will put the website on the show notes as well. Yeah. So thank you very much, Martin. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, my friend.
It's been a pleasure. Loved it. Thanks a lot.
Nice one. And thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again on the next one. Thanks now.